and the idea put forward by our favourite parrot, Peter Bassett, that of course they didn't go into Earth orbit. Because you could see them if they were. And I'm thinking, hang on a minute, what's he talking about? You could see them if they were in Earth orbit. I mean, how many times have you looked up in the sky? 2021, where there are lots of satellites up there, how many times have you looked up in the sky and seen a satellite going overhead in daylight?
What do you mean in daylight? When did Peter Bassett say that you can see the Apollo spacecraft in daylight? The only satellite that you can see in daylight is the moon.
In daylight. And then you find out that the only time you can actually see a satellite going overhead, I've seen a few, is when they are in a particular position so that the Earth is going into shadow and the sun is illuminating them from below. That's when you can see them. You can't see them when the sun is illuminating them from above, because they wouldn't show up. And the only time that they are visible when the sun is illuminating them from below is 5 minutes. It's the time it takes a satellite to cross the horizon, which is not very long. So unless you know exactly where to look and when to look, you won't see a thing.
It's the same with the ISS through the telescope. I mean, that thing it comes and it goes.
Yeah, I've seen the ISS.
Oh, that was beautiful. Awesome. Nice.
But it was about 2 or 3 minutes, that's all you get to see it for, because that's the only time that the sun will illuminate it from below. So the idea offered that the Apollo command modules went into low Earth orbit, well, of course you can see them, because they're huge, great things. Yes, they are. 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 The command module isn't that big. Command and service module together aren't that big. They're about the size of a hexagon spy satellite. The hexagon is 60 foot long. And how many people saw that in orbit? That was in polar orbit. It should be easier to see it. But this idea that you could see it if it went into Earth orbit, the Apollo command module, you could see it, is ridiculous. Of course you can't see it. But this idea that you could see it if it went into Earth orbit, the Apollo command module, you could see it, is ridiculous. Of course you can't see it, because you don't know where it is, when it is, and you're not looking out for it because you think it's going to the moon. And there weren't that many satellites around in the late 1960s anyway. There were only the Apollo command modules, and they would be ditching as soon as they could possibly get out of sight. And as you say, get them out of sight, where do they go then? Stage 1, after 50 miles, shuts down. Stage 2, after 2,500 miles, shuts down. 2,500 miles is about the distance from Florida to the eastern Atlantic. That's probably where they ditched. 2,500 miles is about the distance from Florida to the eastern Atlantic. That's probably where they ditched. That's probably where they ditched. That's probably where they ditched.
What about the ones that were said that they were tracking that all the way to the moon? How do you know that they could not have put another package up there beforehand?
Yeah.
Or remember what the Russians did? They put a tape recorder in the craft when they sent it out, so it sounded like there was somebody in there. Well, what if they sent a package to the moon? Same kind of idea, right? So that somebody had something to track. And if you point to an S-band dish up there, that's exactly where it's coming from, exactly where they said.
Yeah, just before Apollo was allegedly launched.
Marcus, you said something right at the very beginning. You said, I do not doubt that man landed on the moon. Is that correct?
Correct.
They did put a satellite up into orbit called the ATS, Testing and Training Satellite. Yeah, it was put up there so that they could experience what it would be like having information coming from space.
TETRA was a very small magnetically stabilized satellite instrumented with an S-band transponder to provide training to Apollo ground stations. Its external configuration was an octahedron, 12 inches on each side. This is a small satellite, powered by solar cells. Its orbit was lower than expected, so it re-entered the atmosphere on April 28, 1968. It orbited the Earth once every 92 minutes, with an periapsis of 287 kilometers and an apoapsis of 490 kms.
And we're told it was deorbited in December 1968. We're told that. We don't know that for certain, because they can tell us a lot of things that aren't necessarily true. Supposing that satellite was still operating throughout the whole Apollo saga up till December 1972 with Apollo 17. Supposing it was still there. It obviously worked the first time. It would obviously work the second time and the third and the sixth time.
Don't forget they were bouncing those signals halfway around the planet from Australia through, right?
Marcus,
Yep.
Scott and Robert have the nerve to present themselves as some sort of experts on the Apollo program when they talk such utter nonsense. Here is Marcus, who has stated that the Apollo detectives do research, but that the NASA parrots do not, while trying to spin the tale that a 12-inch by 12-inch satellite that he suggests was still in orbit up until December 1972, a suggestion that he cannot prove, was used to simulate TV and audio signals from the Moon while orbiting the Earth once every 90 minutes, so it would be in range of tracking stations for only a short period of time, about 20 minutes, once every 90 minutes, a dead giveaway that the signals had not come from the Moon. These detective clowns have no idea what they are talking about. They have no idea how the TV and audio signals from the Apollo missions were received on Earth and then retransmitted by the Intelsat 3 satellite. Intelsat 3 was 1.5 meters tall and weighed 287 kilograms, and was in a geostationary orbit over the Pacific Ocean, and designed to relay commercial global communications, including live television broadcasts. Unlike the tiny 12-inch by 12-inch TETR-1 satellite, which was in low Earth orbit for testing purposes, and not even in orbit when Apollo 8 flew in December 1968.
And they could have connected with anything then, and at launch time they had tons of planes and ships on the water as well as planes in the air that they could run the signals off of. And of course, in case there was an abort, they had to make sure the shipping lanes were clear, that they didn't have an accident that way. And the alternative to that is they secured the entire Atlantic Ocean so that wherever that thing fell, that nobody was going to see it.
It's just a shame the Russians were having some naval exercises when Apollo 13 launched.
And there we have it. The Apollo detectives present their research on satellites. What they actually did was demonstrate that none of their theories for how NASA faked the Apollo moon landings by using satellites that had fallen from orbit months before could have worked. They just do not know anything about anything. And probably the worst thing about sitting through these incredibly dull and idiotic videos by the Apollo detectives is the amount of praise they get for them in the comments section of their channel. It means that there are truly stupid people out there, and they do not want to even try to think.